The silence after the explosion lasted for 17 minutes and 34 seconds. Zekthara counted every moment as her sensors swept the debris field where two fleets had fought and died. The antimatter cascade had done its work with terrible efficiency. Nothing remained of either the UES Defiant or the Kethmore ships except rapidly expanding particles and electromagnetic radiation. The surviving human vessels had retreated to a safe distance, their crews stunned by what they had witnessed. The colony ship New California continued its journey toward the edge of the system, carrying 50,000 civilians who owed their lives to people they would never be able to thank. The battle was over, but Zekthara's mission was just beginning. She was supposed to compile a report on human military capabilities and tactical thinking. The High Council expected detailed analysis of weapons technology, strategic planning, and combat effectiveness. They wanted to know if humanity posed a threat to galactic civilization, or if they could be safely ignored as another primitive species confined to their own small corner of space. Instead, Zekthara found herself staring at data that made no sense according to everything her species understood about warfare and evolution. The humans had technically won the battle, but at a cost that should have made victory meaningless. They had lost 10 of their 12 warships and hundreds of their finest military personnel. Their colonial fleet was crippled, their expansion plans destroyed, and their confidence in their own technology shattered. Yet somehow, impossibly, they seemed to view the outcome as a triumph. Zekthara began monitoring human communications as the survivors regrouped and assessed their losses. What she heard challenged every assumption her advanced civilization had made about rational behavior and evolutionary success. The humans were not mourning their defeat or questioning their decision to fight. Instead, they were celebrating the heroism of those who had died. Admiral Morrison became a legend in the span of hours. His final speech was transmitted across human space and beyond, reaching Earth itself within days. The colonists spoke of him not as a failed commander who had lost his fleet, but as a hero who had proven that humanity belonged among the stars. Captain Lisa Barnes and the crew of the UES Courage were remembered for their sacrifice in the battle's opening moments. Colonel Torres and his ground team became symbols of human determination to protect the innocent regardless of the odds. Chief Engineer Maya Patel was honored for choosing death over surrender when her knowledge could save others. But it was the final crew of the UES Defiant who captured the human imagination most completely. Morrison, Carter, Rodriguez, and Mitchell were transformed from military casualties into something approaching religious figures. Their willingness to die for strangers became the foundation for a new human understanding of what their species could achieve. Zekthara discovered personal belongings in the wreckage that her salvage drones recovered from the debris field. A letter from Morrison to his son, never transmitted, explaining why duty sometimes required impossible choices. An engagement ring that had belonged to Lieutenant Walsh, meant for a proposal he would never make. Torres's journal filled with sketches of his team and stories of their families back on Earth. These artifacts troubled Zekthara in ways she could not explain to herself. Her species had evolved beyond such emotional attachments millions of years ago. The Vorthak Collective made decisions based on logic and efficiency, not sentiment and personal connection. Individual desires were subordinated to collective needs through rational analysis, rather than emotional sacrifice. Yet as she studied these human relics, Zekthara began to wonder if her people had lost something essential in their pursuit of perfect logic. The humans had fought not because their computers told them they could win, but because they believed some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the odds. The Kethmore survivors who managed to escape in damaged ships carried a very different message back to their empire. Their reports spoke of an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. The humans fought like demons when cornered, but died like angels when others needed protection. They combined savage determination with incomprehensible compassion, creating warriors who were both terrifying and admirable. Most importantly, the Kethmore commanders recognized something in human behavior that gave them pause. This was a species that would never surrender as long as they had something to protect. Conquering their worlds would require killing every last human defender, and even then, the survivors would find ways to fight back. The Kethmore Empire, built on conquest and intimidation, found itself facing an enemy that could not be conquered through superior firepower alone. For the first time in their history, they encountered a species that became more dangerous when threatened rather than less. Zekthara spent weeks compiling her report, struggling to translate human behavior into concepts her own species could understand. How could she explain that these primitive mammals had discovered something her advanced civilization had forgotten? How could she describe the power that came from choosing others over self, hope over logic, and meaning over survival? Her final report recommended immediate diplomatic contact with humanity. She argued that any species capable of such sacrifice and growth deserved recognition as equals in galactic civilization. The humans had proven they possessed something more valuable than advanced technology or superior weapons. They had demonstrated the capacity for conscious evolution, the ability to become better than their origin suggested. The High Council rejected her recommendations without serious consideration. They dismissed her findings as contamination from prolonged observation, suggesting that extended contact with primitive species could distort even trained scientific minds. Her request for additional study was denied, and she was reassigned to safer research projects involving gas giant atmospheric composition. But Zekthara could not forget what she had witnessed. Years passed as humanity spread across the galaxy, establishing new colonies and making contact with other species. Their reputation grew with each encounter. They were known as fierce warriors when threatened, but generous allies when friendship was offered. Other species learned to respect both their determination and their compassion. The humans never forgot the Battle of Kepler 442, as they came to call it. They built monuments to the fallen and taught their children about the importance of standing for something greater than yourself. The values demonstrated in that brief conflict became the foundation for human expansion across the stars. Zekthara watched from a distance as humanity joined the galactic community, not as conquerors, but as partners. They brought with them ideas about cooperation and sacrifice that many species had forgotten or never learned. Their influence spread quietly but persistently, reminding other civilizations that advancement meant more than just technological progress. Eventually, Zekthara made a decision that would have horrified her superiors if they had discovered it. She began secretly providing intelligence to human forces, sharing information about hostile species and dangerous regions of space. It was her way of atoning for her species' blindness to what truly mattered in the universe. She never made direct contact with humanity, never revealed herself or her actions, but she carried the weight of understanding what her people had lost in their pursuit of perfection. The Vorthak Collective had achieved technological mastery and logical thinking, but they had forgotten how to choose love over logic, hope over certainty, and others over self. The humans had reminded her that the greatest strength in the universe was not superior weapons or advanced technology. It was the willingness to sacrifice for something bigger than yourself, to stand for principles even when standing meant falling, and to believe that individual actions could make a difference in a vast and often hostile cosmos. Zekthara carried that knowledge like a burden and a blessing for the rest of her long life. She had been commanded to watch humans at war, but in doing so, she had discovered what her own species had lost in their evolution toward perfection. She had learned what it meant to be truly alive. The rescue of the civilians from the planet's surface had cost the human fleet precious time and resources. While Colonel Torres and his team fought their impossible battle below, the space engagement had continued with devastating intensity. Both fleets were now shadows of their former strength. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant, surrounded by the bodies of his command crew. The ship's armor was breached in 17 places, life support was failing on 6 decks, and the main weapons array was operating at 30% capacity. Around him, the remainder of the human fleet struggled to maintain formation. Of the 12 ships that had entered the battle, only 4 remained combat effective. The Kethmore had fared little better, reduced from 37 vessels to fewer than 15. But those 15 ships still represented overwhelming firepower compared to what humanity had left. Communications Officer Beth Carter worked frantically at her damaged console, trying to maintain contact with the surviving human vessels. She was barely 22 years old, fresh from the Naval Academy on Mars. This was her first real combat assignment, and she had watched her entire training class die around her in the past 6 hours. Carter's hands shook as she transmitted status, reports between ships, but her voice remained steady. Morrison had noticed her composure under fire and come to rely on her calm professionalism. In a battle where chaos threatened to consume everything, her ability to maintain communications had become crucial to the fleet's survival. The Kethmore commander chose that moment to broadcast on all frequencies, his words translated by the universal language protocols that all spacefaring species used. Human Admiral Morrison, you have fought with unexpected courage, but this battle is over. Surrender your remaining ships and the colony vessel New California. Your surviving crews will be allowed to return to Earth. Zekthara waited for Morrison's response with scientific curiosity. The rational choice was obvious. Surrender would save thousands of lives and allow humanity to retreat to their home system. The alternative was the complete destruction of their colonial fleet and the 50,000 civilians aboard the New California. Morrison's reply surprised everyone listening, including the Kethmore commander and Zekthara herself. Instead of accepting terms or negotiating for better conditions, the admiral activated his ship's general communications system and spoke to both fleets simultaneously. Kethmore, Commander, you offer us the chance to run back to Earth with our heads down, to abandon our homes and accept that humanity has no right to walk among the stars. You believe that might makes right, that the strong should rule over the weak, and that conquest is the highest achievement of any species. Morrison paused, looking around his devastated bridge at the young officers who had chosen to stay at their posts despite the overwhelming odds. You're wrong about us. You're wrong about what makes a species worthy of the stars. We don't seek to conquer other worlds or dominate other peoples. We explore because we're curious. We build colonies because we dream of better futures for our children. We fight when we must because some things are worth defending. The human admiral's words carried across space to reach not just the combatants but the colony ship itself, where 50,000 civilians listened to the man who held their fate in his hands. Today we've learned something about ourselves. We've discovered that humans will die for strangers, that we'll sacrifice everything for people we've never met, and that we believe every life has value regardless of species or origin. Morrison's final statement would be recorded in the historical archives of a dozen different civilizations. We reject your terms, Kethmore. We reject the idea that strength comes from conquest or that survival requires submission. If humanity is to end today, it will end with us standing for something greater than ourselves. The Kethmore response was immediate and overwhelming. Every surviving ship in their fleet opened fire on the UES Defiant, concentrating their entire remaining firepower on Morrison's flagship. The human admiral had chosen defiance over survival, and the aliens intended to make him pay the ultimate price for that choice. But Morrison had one final card to play. Dr. Emma Rodriguez, the fleet's chief medical officer, had been working in the Defiance engineering section since the battle began. She was not a combat engineer or a weapons specialist, but a surgeon whose job was to save lives rather than take them. However, the ship's catastrophic damage had forced her to become something she had never intended to be. Rodriguez had discovered that the Defiance experimental antimatter drive could be reconfigured as a weapon of unprecedented power. The process would create a controlled cascade reaction that would destroy everything within a 50-kilometer radius. The explosion would eliminate the remaining Kethmore fleet, but also annihilate any human ships within the blast zone. Morrison made the decision that would define his legacy and haunt Zekthara's memory forever. He ordered the civilian evacuation pods launched while the remaining human warships moved to maximum safe distance. Then he began the antimatter cascade sequence with only his essential bridge crew remaining aboard the Defiant communications. Officer Carter refused the Admiral's direct order to evacuate. She insisted that someone needed to maintain communications until the final moment, to ensure that the other human ships could coordinate their escape and that the colony vessel received warning of the explosion. Her young voice carried absolute determination as she explained her reasoning. Dr. Rodriguez also chose to remain. The medical officer had begun treating wounded crew members in the damaged sections of the ship, and she refused to abandon patients who were too injured to reach the evacuation pods. Her duty as a physician outweighed her desire for survival. Chief Engineer Tony Mitchell, one of the few senior officers still alive, stayed to manually control the antimatter reaction. The automated systems had been damaged beyond repair, requiring constant human intervention to prevent the cascade from destabilizing prematurely. His expertise was the only thing standing between a controlled explosion and a chaotic detonation that might not destroy the enemy fleet. As the countdown continued, each member of the skeleton crew found time to record personal messages. Morrison spoke to his son about duty and sacrifice. Carter left a video for her parents explaining why she had chosen to stay. Rodriguez recorded instructions for the other medical officers about treating radiation exposure. Mitchell wrote a technical manual for future engineers about antimatter safety procedures. Zekathara found herself focusing her sensors on these final moments with an intensity that surprised her scientific objectivity. These humans were facing certain death, yet their thoughts were not of themselves but of others. They worried about the people they were leaving behind and the knowledge they would take with them to the grave. The antimatter cascade reached critical threshold as the Kethmore ships closed to point-blank range. Morrison's final transmission was broadcasted on all frequencies, his words carrying across the star system to reach the retreating human fleet and the colony ship beyond. "This is Admiral Jake Morrison, United Earth Fleet. We came to the stars seeking a better future for humanity. We found something even more valuable. We found out who we really are when everything is at stake. We are the people who stand between evil and innocence. We are the ones who choose hope over despair and courage over fear. We are human, and that is enough." The explosion that followed could be seen from 3 star systems away. The UES Defiant vanished in a ball of pure energy that consumed the entire Kethmore fleet and left nothing but expanding radiation in its wake. Morrison, Carter, Rodriguez, Mitchell, and the others had purchased victory with their lives. But Zekathara found herself thinking not about the tactical outcome or the strategic implications. Instead, she wondered about the letters they had written, the families they had mentioned, and the dreams they had sacrificed for people they would never know. For the first time in her life, the advanced alien observer found herself wishing she could have warned them, could have saved them, could have offered them a different choice. For the first time in millions of years of evolution, a member of the Vorthak Collective had learned what regret truly meant. The quantum pulse from Chief Engineer Patel's sacrifice had changed everything. Human weapons now carved through Kethmore shields like heated blades through ice. The previously invulnerable enemy fleet found itself taking serious damage for the first time since the battle began. Admiral Morrison seized the opportunity immediately. His tactical display showed the Kethmore formation beginning to waver as their commanders struggled to adapt to this unexpected development. The human admiral's next decision would have seemed insane to any military strategist in the galaxy. He divided his already outnumbered fleet. Half the human ships would continue the space battle, while a small force attempted something that had never been tried before in interstellar warfare. Colonel Sam Torres would lead 12 soldiers in an assault on the Kethmore ground installation on the planet below. Their mission was to rescue 3,000 human civilians who had been trapped in the colony's mining complex when the Kethmore fleet arrived. Zekathara focused her sensors on the small transport ship carrying Torres and his team toward the planet's surface. Her analytical mind calculated their chances of success at less than 1%. The Kethmore had over 300 soldiers guarding the mining complex, armed with advanced weapons and protected by energy barriers that could stop conventional human attacks. 12 humans against 300 Kethmore warriors. The mathematics were absurd. Torres himself seemed to understand the odds perfectly. His communication with Admiral Morrison before departure was brief and professional. "Sir, we'll get those people out or die trying. Either way, the Kethmore will know they've been in a fight." The transport ship's pilot was Lieutenant Danny Walsh, a young man barely 25 years old who had been flying for only 3 years. His girlfriend back on Earth was expecting him to propose when he returned from this mission. The engagement ring was locked in his personal storage compartment, along with a letter explaining his feelings in case he never got the chance to speak them aloud. Zekthura watched through orbital sensors as the human transport approached the planet under heavy fire. Kethmore ground batteries opened up with plasma artillery that could have destroyed the small ship with a single hit. Walsh flew through the barrage with skill that surprised even Zekthara's advanced targeting computers. The young pilot seemed to anticipate each shot before it was fired, threading his ship through gaps in the defensive fire that existed for only microseconds. The transport landed in a crater 2 kilometers from the mining complex. Torres and his team emerged into an atmosphere thick with smoke and the smell of burning metal. The Kethmore had been using plasma weapons to cut through the complex's defensive barriers, and several buildings were already on fire. What happened? Next challenged every assumption Zekthar had made about human military capabilities. Torres divided his 12 soldiers into 3 teams of 4, each with a specific mission. The first team would create a diversion at the main gate. The second would infiltrate through the mining tunnels. The third would secure the evacuation route back to their transport. The plan was militarily sound but relied entirely on perfect execution, with no margin for error. One mistake would result in the death of all 12 soldiers and the 3,000 civilians they were trying to save. Sergeant Abal, Kelly Murphy led the diversion team. She was a career soldier with 15 years of experience and, more importantly, she was the mother of a 7-year-old daughter named Emma, who was waiting for her back on Earth. Murphy had promised Emma that she would be home in time for her birthday party next month. Murphy's team attacked the main gate with everything they had. Human plasma rifles and explosive charges created a spectacular light show that drew every Kethmore soldier in the area. The aliens responded exactly as Torres had predicted, concentrating their forces to repel what appeared to be a direct assault. While the Kethmore focused on Murphy's team, the second group led by Corporal Ben Carter slipped into the mining tunnels. Carter was a demolitions expert who had been born in the asteroid mining colonies. He knew these tunnels better than anyone, having worked in similar installations throughout the outer systems. The tunnel network stretched for kilometers beneath the complex. Carter led his team through maintenance shafts and ore processing chambers, following routes that would bring them directly beneath the civilian detention area. Their movements were silent and precise, guided by Carter's intimate knowledge of mining operations. The third team, commanded by Torres himself, prepared the evacuation route. They had to clear a path from the mining complex to the transport ship while avoiding Kethmore patrols and automated defense systems. Torres moved with the confidence of a man who had spent 20 years in military operations, but even his experience had never prepared him for odds like these. Zekthara found herself riveted by the tactical display. The 3 human teams moved, like parts of a single organism, each group supporting the others through perfect coordination. When Murphy's diversion drew too much attention, Carter's team created a secondary distraction in the tunnels. When Torres encountered a Kethmore patrol, Murphy's team provided covering fire from across the complex. But the plan began to fall apart when the Kethmore commander realized what was happening. The alien officer was experienced and intelligent, quickly recognizing the diversion for what it was. Instead of keeping his forces concentrated at the main gate, he split them into hunting teams that began sweeping the complex for infiltrators. Carter's team found themselves trapped in the tunnels as Kethmore soldiers poured into the underground network. The demolitions expert made a decision that would have honored his ancestors who had died in Earth's ancient wars. He ordered his 3 teammates to continue toward the civilians while he stayed behind to collapse the tunnel. The explosion that followed sealed off the tunnel network, but also buried Carter under tons of rock and metal. His final transmission was a set of coordinates for an alternate route to the detention area, delivered in a calm voice as the ceiling collapsed around him. Murphy's team faced a similar crisis at the main gate. Overwhelming numbers of Kethmore soldiers had surrounded their position, and their ammunition was running dangerously low. The sergeant made her own impossible choice. She used herself as bait to draw the aliens into a trap set by her teammate, Private Danny Walsh. The 2 soldiers shared a brief moment over their helmet communication systems. Murphy mentioned Emma's birthday party and how she had promised to bring a present from the stars. Walsh talked about his proposal plans and how he hoped his girlfriend would say yes. Then they triggered their remaining explosives. The blast cleared a path for the civilian evacuation, but cost both soldiers their lives. Their sacrifice allowed Torres and the remaining team members to reach the detention area, where 3,000 frightened humans waited for rescue. The evacuation itself was a masterpiece of improvisation under fire. Torres organized the civilians into groups while his surviving soldiers provided protection against Kethmore counterattacks. They had no vehicles and no air support, just determination and the promise that someone would come for them. Lieutenant Walsh brought the transport ship in under heavy fire, landing directly outside the mining complex despite plasma batteries that should have destroyed his vessel. The young pilot held his position while civilians poured aboard, taking hit after hit on his ship's armor without retreating. As the last civilian reached safety, Torres transmitted a message that Zekthara would remember for the rest of her life. "Admiral, we got them all. Every single one. Murphy and Carter and the others, they didn't die for nothing. These people are going home." The transport lifted off with its precious cargo as the mining complex exploded behind them. The Kethmore had decided to destroy the installation rather than let the humans claim any victory. But 3,000 civilians were alive because 12 soldiers had chosen to risk everything for people they had never met. Zekthara realized that her understanding of warfare had been completely wrong. She had expected to observe a battle between two fleets, a simple matter of technology and tactics. Instead, she was witnessing something far more complex and powerful. She was watching humans discover what they were truly capable of becoming. The Kethmore opened fire with devastating precision. Their plasma cannons tore through space like burning spears, each shot carrying enough energy to vaporize a city block. The human shields flickered and died under the assault, their primitive energy barriers no match for weapons that had conquered star systems. Zekthara watched through her sensors as the UES Courage took a direct hit to its port side. The explosion sent debris spinning into the void while secondary fires erupted along the ship's hull. Captain Lisa Barnes, commanding the Courage, should have pulled back to repair the damage. Any rational commander would have withdrawn her wounded vessel from the battle line. Instead, Barnes pushed her ship forward. The human captain's voice crackled across the communication channels as she spoke to her crew. "Engineering, I need everything you can give me. Weapons, target their lead destroyer. All hands prepare for ramming speed." Zekthara's scientific mind struggled to process what she was hearing. Ramming speed was a tactic from ancient Earth, naval warfare completely useless in space combat where ships could maneuver in 3 dimensions. The Kethmore destroyer would simply move aside and destroy the Courage with concentrated fire. But something strange happened. The Kethmore commander, perhaps confused by such an primitive attack, hesitated for crucial seconds. In that brief moment, the damaged human ship managed to close the distance. The Courage's remaining weapons fired at point-blank range, overwhelming the destroyer's shields through sheer proximity. Captain Barnes transmitted her final message as her ship collided with the enemy vessel. "Tell my family I kept my promise. Tell them I came home." Both ships vanished in a brilliant explosion that lit up Zekthara's sensors. She quickly reviewed the battle data, trying to understand what had just occurred. By all logical analysis, Captain Barnes had thrown away her ship and crew for no tactical gain. 1 human vessel and 1 Kethmore destroyer were both destroyed. The exchange rate was equal, which meant the humans were losing since they had fewer ships to begin with. Yet, something about the human crew's behavior troubled her scientific objectivity. The communication logs showed that every member of the Courage's crew had volunteered for the ramming attack. Not one had requested transfer to another ship. Not one had questioned the order. They had chosen to die with their captain, and their final transmission spoke not of fear but of honor. The battle continued with increasing intensity. Human fighters launched from their carrier ships, tiny 1-person craft that should have been helpless against Kethmore defense systems. Commander Alex Rivera led a squadron of 12 fighters in an attack on a Kethmore cruiser. His tactical plan was simple and desperate. The fighters would overwhelm the cruiser's point defense with coordinated strikes. The Kethmore shot down 11 of the 12 fighters in the first 30 seconds of the attack. Rivera's fighter was the only one to survive, and his ship's life support system had been damaged in the initial exchange. Warning signals flashed across his instrument panel as oxygen levels dropped toward critical. Zekthara expected Rivera to retreat and attempt repairs. Instead, the human pilot continued his attack run, broadcasting tactical data to the main fleet even as his cockpit filled with toxic fumes. His voice grew weaker with each transmission, but he never stopped providing intelligence on Kethmore, shield frequencies, and weapon patterns. Rivera's fighter exploded just short of its target, but the data he had transmitted allowed other human ships to adjust their weapons. The next human attack wave proved significantly more effective, landing several hits on previously impenetrable Kethmore shields. One human had died to save dozens of others he would never meet. The mathematical equation was favorable, but the method disturbed Zekthara in ways she could not fully understand. Her own species had abandoned such inefficient behaviors millions of years ago. Individual sacrifice for collective benefit went against every principle of logical self-preservation. The turning point came when Chief Engineer Maya Patel discovered a critical flaw in Kethmore shielding technology. Working deep in the engine room of the UES Defiant, she noticed that the enemy weapons created harmonic resonances in their own defensive systems. If human ships could match those frequencies, they could punch through Kethmore shields with conventional weapons. The discovery should have been transmitted to the fleet immediately. However, implementing the modification required manual adjustment to each ship's weapon systems. The process would take hours that the human fleet did not have. Unless someone could develop a way to broadcast the modification frequency to every human vessel simultaneously. Patel's solution was brilliant and terrifying. She could create a quantum resonance pulse using the Defiant's main reactor, but the process would flood the engineering section with lethal radiation. Anyone who stayed to complete the modification would die within minutes. Zekthara listened, in fascination as Patel explained her plan to Admiral Morrison. The chief engineer spoke calmly about her own death as if it were a minor technical detail. Morrison offered to assign volunteers to help her, but Patel refused. She said the radiation would kill anyone who entered engineering, so there was no point in wasting additional lives. 20 minutes later, Patel activated the quantum pulse. The modification frequency transmitted to every human ship in the fleet, allowing their weapons to penetrate Kethmore shields for the first time in the battle. Her final transmission was a set of technical instructions for the other engineers, delivered in a steady voice despite the radiation poisoning that was killing her. The human fleet suddenly became much more dangerous. Kethmore ships that had seemed invulnerable began taking serious damage. The tactical balance shifted as human weapons found their mark with increasing frequency. But Zekthara found herself focusing on the individual humans, rather than the overall battle. These primitive mammals were behaving in ways that defied her understanding of intelligent species. They chose death over survival when the choice served their collective good. They gave their lives for abstract concepts like duty and honor, rather than concrete benefits like genetic preservation. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to find meaning in their sacrifices. The communication logs showed humans facing death, with what could only be described as satisfaction. They spoke of keeping promises to people they loved. They expressed hope that their actions would save others. They died believing that their individual lives had purpose beyond mere existence. Zekthara's scientific training told her that such behavior was evolutionary madness. Species survived through individual self-preservation and genetic propagation. Voluntary death for non-relatives served no biological purpose. Yet these humans seemed to derive strength from the very behaviors that should have weakened them. The battle was far from over, but already her carefully prepared reports would need significant revision. The High Council expected analysis of human military capabilities and tactical thinking. Instead, she found herself studying something far more complex and disturbing. She was watching the birth of heroes. As the next wave of attacks began, Zekthara realized that her mission had become something entirely different from what the collective had intended. She was no longer simply observing a primitive species at war. She was witnessing the emergence of something her own advanced civilization had forgotten how to be. The humans were teaching her about courage. Zekthara floated in the quiet darkness of her observation chamber, her 6 eyes focused on the data streams flowing across the curved walls. The Vorthak Collective had assigned her this mission 3 cycles ago, and now the moment had finally arrived. She was about to witness something her people had been waiting to see for over 200 Earth years. The humans were going to war. Her sleek vessel, the Silent Watcher, hung invisible in the void near the Kepler 442 system. Advanced cloaking. Technology made her ship undetectable to any known scanning methods. The Collective had perfected this art long before these young mammals had even discovered fire. Now she would use it to study them during their first real test as a spacefaring species. Zekathara adjusted her neural interface and reviewed her mission parameters one more time. The High Council wanted detailed reports on human military capabilities, tactical thinking, and most importantly, their response to overwhelming odds. The data would help the Collective decide if humanity deserved a place among the civilized species of the galaxy, or if they should remain quarantined to their small corner of space. The enemy approaching was well known to the Collective. The Kethmore Empire had conquered 17 star systems in the past 50 years. They were brutal, efficient, and completely without mercy toward species they considered inferior. Their technology was advanced, their warriors were fearless, and their ships were among the fastest in the galaxy. Most importantly, they outnumbered the human fleet by almost 3 to 1. Zekathara had studied the humans for months in preparation for this assignment. They were a young species, barely 300 years into their industrial age and only 50 years into serious space exploration. Their technology was crude but functional. Their ships were slow and poorly armed compared to Kethmore vessels. Their military tactics were based on ancient Earth conflicts that had no bearing on 3-dimensional space combat. The Collective's computers had run the battle simulation thousands of times. The result was always the same: human defeat within 6 hours with casualty rates exceeding 90%. It would be a massacre worthy of academic study, but nothing more. The long-range sensors detected movement at the edge of the system. The human fleet was arriving right on schedule. Zekathara leaned forward in her observation couch, her scientific instruments recording every detail. 12 human vessels dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a loose formation that immediately told her everything she needed to know about their tactical understanding. They had positioned themselves between the Kethmore approach vector and the colony ship New California. The massive civilian vessel carried 50,000 human settlers who had been building a new world in this system for the past 8 years. The Kethmore had given them an ultimatum 3 months ago: abandon all colonies beyond Earth's solar system or face complete destruction. The humans had chosen to fight. The lead human vessel was larger than the others, bristling with what passed for weapons in their primitive arsenal. Zekathara's sensors identified it as the UES Defiant, flagship of their colonial defense fleet. The ship's commander was Admiral Jake Morrison, a career military officer with 40 years of experience in Earth's various conflicts. Zekathara had read Morrison's file. He was considered one of humanity's finest strategic minds, a man who had never lost a major engagement. His tactics were unconventional by galactic standards, but had proven effective against other human forces. Of course, he had never faced an enemy like the Kethmore. The other ships in the human fleet were a mix of military escorts and converted civilian vessels. Zekathara noted the modifications that had been hastily welded to cargo haulers and passenger transports. Missile tubes, energy projectors, and armor plating had been added wherever space allowed. The humans were trying to turn merchant ships into warships, a desperate measure that spoke to their lack of proper military infrastructure. As she watched, the human formation began to shift. The larger military vessels moved to the front while the converted civilian ships formed a second line. Behind them all, the massive colony ship New California continued its slow journey toward the edge of the system, carrying those 50,000 souls away from the coming battle. Zekathara activated her deep space communicators and began transmitting her initial observations back to the collective homeworld. The signal would take 3 days to reach the High Council, but they would expect regular updates throughout the engagement. She described the human formation, their obvious technological disadvantages, and her preliminary assessment of their chances. The Kethmore fleet appeared at the far edge of the system like a swarm of metal insects. 37 warships, each one individually more powerful than any vessel in the human formation. Their ships were sleek and deadly, designed for one purpose only: the complete destruction of anything that opposed the Empire's expansion. Zekathara watched as both fleets began their approach. The humans maintained their defensive posture while the Kethmore spread into a wide attack formation. It was textbook strategy for both sides, though the outcome was already determined by simple mathematics. The distance between the fleets shrank slowly. Space combat required patience as vessels maneuvered across millions of kilometers, searching for optimal firing positions. Zekathara used this time to focus her sensors on individual human ships, studying their crew communications and internal systems. What she found surprised her. Despite facing impossible odds, the human crews showed no signs of panic or despair. Their communications were calm and professional. Their internal systems were running at peak efficiency. Most puzzling of all, many of the crew members were recording personal messages, not surrender offers or pleas for mercy, but final words to families back on Earth. Admiral Morrison's voice cut across all human frequencies as the fleets closed to weapon range. His words were broadcast not just to his own ships but to the Kethmore as well. A clear challenge that made Zekathara pause in her data collection. "This is Admiral Jake Morrison of the United Earth Fleet. You have demanded that we abandon our homes and return to Earth with our tails between our legs. You believe that humanity is too weak to stand among the stars. Today you will learn that you are wrong. Today you will discover what happens when you threaten human families. We will show you that some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight seems hopeless." Zekathara's analytical mind processed these words with growing confusion. Morrison was not trying to negotiate or delay the inevitable. He was not begging for mercy or offering terms of surrender. Instead, he seemed to be looking forward to the battle, as if he believed his primitive fleet actually had a chance against the Kethmore Empire. The first energy beams lanced across the darkness and the battle began.